Hello, my name is Jacqueline Pollauf, and today I wanted to talk about glissandos in repertoire on the harp. Now, a glisse or glissando is an idiomatic technique. It's really beautiful and it suits the harp beautifully, so glisses come up all over the place in all kinds of music. And what I wanted to do today was talk about 6 different pieces of music. I'm going to start with the beginning piece, and then each piece will gradually become more difficult. And all of these pieces feature glissandos in different ways. So what I'll do is I'll demonstrate a little bit from each piece and then talk about the glisses that it contains and offer some tips and tricks for playing these. One interesting thing about glisses is that sometimes what makes them difficult is not so much the glisse itself, but kind of the details that surround the glisse. So sometimes the rhythm of the glisse, or what the other hand is doing, or what your feet with pedals might be doing with the glisse, all of that can add up to make some of these glisse situations a bit complicated. And as I mentioned, since the glisse is such an idiomatic technique, it comes up all over the place. And I actually have a couple of other videos talking about glisses. One just looks at the technique of glisses, so how to play glisses, different types of glisses, how you might set your hands up, all of that. If you've never played a glisse before, I think that video is a great starting point, and I'll put a link to that below in the description. And then actually I have another video quite similar to this one talking about glisses in repertoire, but with different repertoire. So what happened is when I sat down to make that video, I started going through all my music, looking for pieces with glissandos that really featured them. And I had a huge stack by the time I got through sorting. So I decided that it might be nice to make 2 videos. So this is sort of a continuation of that video, even more repertoire with glissandos. I wanted to start with Moonlight by Susann McDonald. This comes from a series McDonald has with composer Linda Wood called Graded Recital Series, Harp Solos, and this is from Volume 1. Now this piece, Moonlight, is a beginning level piece playable on a lever harp, and there are a couple of sections of glisses throughout it. One is towards the end of the piece. There are 2 sections of descending glisses like this. And I think that's a great chance for a beginning harpist to just work on playing glisses with the thumb, having to alternate hands, and think about overlapping the glisses, which gives a really nice sort of cascading effect. And then for a bit more of a challenge, in the 3rd phrase, there's a section with continuous glisses in the right hand and a melody low in the harp in the left hand. I'll just play the first part of that. So for many beginning harpists, this is the first time that they've had to do a continuous glisse, where they're coming down and then they have to flip around and come back up without a break. And in practicing that, it's always a great idea to just do the right hand alone, and to really look for that moment, maybe bring the thumb up nice and high. A lot of harpists like to do that. So the second finger has room to tuck in there and come back up. And then same thing, the thumb gets ready, stretching out so that you can just flip over really seamlessly between the 2, whether you're ascending or descending. So once a harpist is feeling comfortable with that, then a lot of times I have them just add the left hand in gradually. So maybe just playing the first 2 notes of the left hand while glissing, doing that a few times, and then eventually building up to adding more of the left hand. That 3rd phrase is a bit tricky with the coordination between the hands. There's a lot going on, so it can take a while to get really nice and smooth. I'm going to go ahead and play so you can hear it a little bit more in context, the 3rd and the 4th phrases of Moonlight. Next, I'd like to look at the Glissando Waltz, written by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart and arranged here for the harp by Mildred Dilling. And this comes from Dilling's book, 30 Little Classics for the Harp. I'd say this piece is written at an early intermediate level, and it's playable on a lever harp. So the title is very descriptive. This is in fact a waltz, and it's filled with glissandos. And the glissandos are only ever ascending or descending, which in some ways seems quite simple. There's no overlapping or crossing or continuous glissandos, anything like that. But on the other hand, these have to be really precise glisses, both in terms of the range where they start and end, generally just under an octave, and also rhythmically how they fit into the whole waltz feel. Here's just the first two measures. And I think one thing that makes this really challenging is that frequently as harpists we learn things a little bit slowly and then gradually speed them up. But with these glisses being so short and so precise, if you play this piece really slowly, it's very hard to fit the gliss in as you should. So I think one great way to practice it would be to temporarily take the glisses out and just leave the starting and ending pitches in sort of as a frame, so that you get really comfortable with where those starting and ending pitches are, with what your left hand is doing, with how everything lines up. And once that's all nice and comfortable and you can do it at a fairly decent tempo, then I'd go ahead and put the glisses back in, and I think it'll be a lot easier at just a little bit more of a moving tempo. So I'm going to go ahead and play the first section of this Glissando waltz as a demonstration. Now we have an orchestral excerpt rather than a solo piece. This is the Harp Cadenza from the Piano Concerto in G by Maurice Ravel. And Ravel writes so beautifully for the harp, and he uses glisses all over the place in his writing. Actually, we're going to look at another piece by Ravel in just a little bit. But this cadenza from the Piano Concerto in G, I would say is written at in maybe a late intermediate level. It's playable only on a pedal harp. And throughout it, your right hand is playing these long continuous glissandos, and then your left hand has some tricky stuff. There are some really large chords, and there's also a lot of harmonics. And then halfway through, there's a brief fermata where you have to do a lot of pedal changes and continue on with more of the same, but with a new setup for your gliss based on the pedals. So one interesting thing about this is that Ravel just kind of leaves the glissing up to you. He writes out the start of it and says for it to continue, but for the harpist to sort of fill in exactly when they're going to switch from up and down and everything, however they best choose. So for myself, I like to just make the glisses quarter notes. So you're going up 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And then one thing I think about a lot in this is where the left hand is. Sometimes it's kind of low enough that it's out of the way of the gliss, but a couple times it gets up really pretty high. So that in those instances, I make my gliss a little bit shorter to keep my hands from running into each other or overlapping. So I'm constantly adjusting the length of my gliss based on where the left hand is. I think in practicing this, kind of putting it together in layers is a great way to do it. Maybe to just work on the gliss first, then maybe to do the gliss with just the left hand chords, and then maybe the gliss with just the left hand harmonics. You could even make them not harmonics a couple of times, just play them as regular notes. And then gradually putting it all together, the glisses plus the chords plus the harmonics, thinking about adjusting the length of the glisses while you do all of that. So here is the cadenza from the Piano Concerto in G. Next, I wanted to discuss Automne by Marcel Grandjany. Automne, or Autumn in English, is a late intermediate level piece. It's playable only on the pedal harp, and it's written in 3 sections. And the final section really could be an etude on glisses because there's so much going on. So Grandjany starts out similarly to the Ravel we just looked at, where you have a continuous gliss in the right hand and some harmonics and low notes in the left hand. And from there, it steadily becomes a bit more complicated. So there are some pedal changes within the continuous glisses. There's not a break for the pedal changes. Instead, you just have to think about being very precise and lining them right up with the point where you're switching the direction of the gliss. And then a bit later on, Grandjany moves to double glisses, where you're doing 2 glisses in one hand at a time. So to do this, I do what a lot of harpists do, which is I use fingers 2 and 3, and I make them vertical, pointing up, not a typical hand position at all, and then drag them along the strings like that to get a nice clean sound. And in this instance, these glisses are supposed to be a third apart, so I'm really thinking about trying to maintain that interval of a third within the gliss. So I'm going to play a bit of the middle section here of Automne and try and cover a few of those different gliss techniques that I just went over. Next we have Fraicheur, or Zephyrs, by Carlos Salzedo. And Salzedo was unabashed about his love of glissandos. They're all over the place in his music, and a lot of times in really innovative ways. So in this piece, which is written for pedal harp, the entire piece is made up of glisses, and there's a lot of specialty effects with those glisses, which I really like about this piece. It starts out with Salzedo's Aeolian rustling. And what you do for this effect is you open up your whole hand using all 5 fingers and just gently draw your fingers along the strings. So it gives kind of a bit of a delicate, almost muted sound. Really kind of sets a mood, and that's how he opens this piece. And then a few measures later, you have the falling hail technique, which is where you use the back of your fingers. You're actually using the fingernails on fingers 2, 3, and 4, and doing a descending gliss with that. So you can hear you get a little bit of a percussive sound with the falling hail effect. And then from there he starts combining different effects. So there's some, in this piece, standard 2-note glisses, but there's also a few where you're doing a falling hail with one finger and playing the thumb normally. So you have a combination of a normal gliss sound with a falling hail sound, the percussive effect. So this is a great piece to work on all of these different extended glissando techniques. I'm going to play just the opening of Fraicheur. Lastly today, I wanted to look at Maurice Ravel's Introduction and Allegro, which is an advanced level piece, playable only on a pedal harp, and it's written for harp with string quartet, flute, and clarinet, so a chamber ensemble. This is a fantastic piece all the way around, and there are many glisses kind of sprinkled throughout the whole thing. I wanted to take a look at some of the more rhythmic glisses in this piece, as I think that's an interesting use of the gliss. So the section that I wanted to start with is a little ways after rehearsal 6. And what happens here is that you have a quadruple gliss, both descending and then ascending, And it's a very rhythmic gliss, a very loud gliss. And then you have just a couple of measures to change a few pedals and do it all over again. So the ensemble is setting you up with a lot of energy to kind of power through these glisses here. So the quadruple gliss is an interesting thing to look at. You have a couple of choices for how you can do it. You can use both hands, but still you have to come up with 4 simultaneous glisses. So what I like to do is do a triple gliss on the way down on the left hand, so using fingers 2, 3, and 4, all pointing up, and then the thumb of the right hand. And then at the bottom, I flip and I do 2 fingers in each hand, fingers 2 and 3 on both hands, to come back up. So that's a little bit weird with changing which fingers you're using. I think practicing it hands alone, so you can go from the 3 fingers to the 2 fingers, and the thumb to the 2 fingers can be really helpful. And as I mentioned, this is supposed to be quite rhythmic, so really try to keep a nice steady beat throughout all of that, and thinking about how the other instruments in the ensemble will set it up and fit in around it can be really helpful. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. First, I'll play the couple of glisses after rehearsal 6, and then I will jump to later in the piece where there's another similar moment. If I can find it in my music, there it is. After 22, the same sort of thing occurs, but with some different pedals. So here are just a couple of short excerpts from Ravel's Introduction and Allegro. I hope that, regardless of the level at which you're playing the harp, this video has given you some ideas for a repertoire you could look at to study glissandos. And if you're looking for even more practice in glisses, I have an exercise book I wrote a little while ago called Glissando Exercises. And in that book, you'll find 50 exercises, all focused on playing glisses on the harp, working on a lot of different types of glisses, working on them equally between the hands, and focusing especially on the range and rhythm of glisses within those exercises. So I'll put a link to that book down in the description in case you're interested. Good luck to you in your study of glissandos.